What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the one and only NIO stock and what you should be looking after for the future. I'm also going to do some in-depth technical analysis and give you guys some very important information about tomorrow, as I do anticipate quite a bit of volatility. And also, I want everyone to know something very important about NIO because we're getting some bearish signals. Now, before I break anything down about what's going on with NIO, before I get into any more details, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire NIO community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, each worth $2,000. And the best part is, any could be a free NIO share, a free Tesla share, or a mix of all of them. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 2 weeks. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Looking at NIO, I told everyone yesterday that I anticipate downside. I drew out this pattern. I mentioned how it's kind of curling like this. It's looking like a bridge, and this thing is slowly starting to descend. See how we're starting to make these lower highs? And I want to talk about something else that's very important. I told everyone NIO was in this channel over the last like 5 weeks, more like 4 weeks, right? NIO was in this channel, this very, very big channel. All right. NIO would bounce between $12, would push up to about 13.2 to 13.4. This is like the resistance range, and support is between 12 and 11.95. So down here, what would NIO do? Bounce, bounce back and forth like this, right? And then I mentioned if NIO breaks below, what is it, $11.95, I'm going to be watching 11.66. All right, that's the zone I'll be watching. And then if NIO breaks that, the next zone to watch would be the previous support, which would have been right before this major gap, this huge gap NIO has. That's going to be 11.33. Where did NIO go today when it broke below $12 and 11.95? NIO fell to 11.68, 2 pennies away from what I predicted. And then I mentioned to everyone, if the market continues to, downtrend, NIO is going to likely end up going to the lower like 11s, 11.33. Now, if NIO has any hope left for this thing to continue to like push up very hard, and I'm just talking about a short-term perspective, very short-term perspective, excuse me, because I'm very bullish long term. Don't forget that. I'm still very bullish. It's just that for the short term for the markets, I am anticipating a crash very, very soon, and I do believe this will drag NIO down. So if NIO breaks 11.33, this thing is going to come crashing down to the mid 10s and maybe even the low 10s. So it has a lot of downside, guys. Be very careful. On the 15-minute time frame, NIO has, the cross right here between the 50 and 200 EMAs. It's the same thing with the moving averages. You could use that too, but it's essentially the same thing. And you're seeing that NIO is showing some bearish momentum. If you look at our MACD or MACD, whatever you want to call it, right here, let me use a larger time frame. On the hourly, right here, NIO has lots of bearish momentum. This is actually closing a bit because NIO is not like, it's not like crashing super hard, but it is starting to downtrend. You guys could quite clearly see it. So what's now going to go on with the markets and how could this affect NIO? I'm going to talk about that in a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes because I want to give you guys some more context because tomorrow is going to be a big day for the markets. We also have quadruple witching. It's a date on which the contracts for index futures, stock futures, index options, and stock options expire simultaneously. And what essentially happens is typically the market does not have any like fixated direction. It doesn't mean the market has to go up, the market has to like go down on this day, but what tends to happen is we tend to see some crazy volatility, especially because this is the last quad witching day of the year. So be very careful. When you look at SPY, this is like an ETF that tracks the S&P 500. What's important about it is we have millions of options expiring tomorrow. And what I noticed is that we have about 472,000 calls in the money and 1.8 million out the money. For the put side, it's 600K in the money and over 3 million out the money. So I'm wondering, does this incentivize them to short the market hard, drag everything down, sell so that they get more puts, in the money? Or Could they be trying to squeeze shorts out of their positions one last time? Either one of these are very possible, but either way, I still anticipate more downside regardless. And I'm going to actually give you guys more perspectives in just a couple of minutes. But first off, let's just look at more macro details about NIO. NIO's volume was 41 million, so we're losing volume. We're not getting the same buying pressure as before. And on top of that, I wanted to note that the short volume percentage, in my opinion, is going to start going up, meaning the selling pressure is going to get stronger on NIO. On top of that, we can quite clearly see the price price ratio coming down, meaning that, and this is exactly what I predicted yesterday. I mentioned this yesterday. I anticipated this to start coming down. And I do believe it's going to continue to downtrend, meaning NIO is not going to be outperforming the market as much as it did before. Looking at the current volume, we are seeing quite a bit of selling in these levels. It is starting to control NIO. NIO is green about 53% of the time on Fridays historically. So what I believe NIO is going to do is going to depend on the markets, but overall, I'm still net bearish for the short term. By short term, I mean like the next couple of weeks, next like month or two. I do anticipate more downside. I do think this will drag NIO down. Let me talk about something important. On SPY, unfortunately, SPY broke below 390. That's a pretty big bearish signal. We broke below the demand zone. I'm not even going to like highlight that in the chart anymore. Also, I'm going to remove this. But I want to break down something. Looking at these time frames, we can actually quite easily, if we use like the 15-minute, we can actually break down this trend here. And I'm seeing two possibilities, maybe like three possibilities. All right. Do not click away from this video while I go over all of them, because you need to hear all of them. You can't just like click away from one and say that I'm saying one thing. I'm not going to say just one thing. I'm going to go over what the possibilities are. So the first one is, and this is very possible, we get a bounce tomorrow or like very soon, and we actually retest the resistance level, which happens to be right about here around this 395 395 area, and then we get another rejection, and then we slowly start to crash going into like the next week. That's also very possible, right? And the ending outcome over the next few weeks is still more bearish. I do believe SPY is going to come down here over the next, who knows how long, whether it's like as soon as tomorrow or the next few weeks. But we do have this big gap around this 375 area on SPY where my cursor is. It is going to most likely fill this gap very soon. But before it ends up filling that gap, there is a possible, a gap fill that could happen, or even a rebound. The second possibility would be, what if we, because of quad witching, they pump the market up to squeeze shorts, and we push to like 399, and then we get a big rejection and come crashing down. I think that's very unlikely, but it is a possibility. All right. But what I do believe is we're going to have some resistance around this, like the 15-minute time frame, looking at the 50 EMA. So I don't expect this thing to push up too hard tomorrow. I think the bears have so much control and they're not going to give up that easily. So like I said, the second possibility, I mean, there is a gap there. It is a possibility, but it's also very possible for this gap to get filled much later in the future when the market recovers. All right. And what's the third possibility? The third possibility is we just continue to do what we did today. We continue to just bleed. We see SPY hit 387, tries to push up, fails, 385 comes, 383, and then we slowly make it to the gap fill in the 375 area. And if we do fill the gap, I wouldn't be surprised if we get a bit of a rebound first before we continue with more downside going into January. I'm pretty bearish for January, unfortunately, based off what's happening in the markets. So main possibilities, and here are the two most likely ones for tomorrow. Market either gets a bit of a rebound, retests resistance, this trend line right over here, and this actually looks kind of clean if you want to draw it this way, or we fail to get that rebound before coming down. And like I said before, we rebound and then we get the big rejection. The second possibility is we just collapse and continue downtrending. Either way, they're both leading to a more downside position. For NIO for tomorrow, okay, I believe NIO is either going to come down to this level. That's going to be around 11.33. I mean, could we start filling the gap? I do believe we're going to end up filling that gap, if I'm going to be honest with everyone. I believe NIO is either going to get a bit of a bounce tomorrow, maybe retest the 15-minute 200 EMA around this like 12.3 area, and then continue with the downtrend. and it comes back to like 11.66, maybe breaks and touches 11.33, and it just starts dropping as time goes on to eventually go down to the 10s for the gap fill. Or what could happen is if the market rebounds, NIO could actually come back to the 12s and maybe hold that for Friday before continuing for the downside a little bit later. But either way, I do believe NIO is going to stay within this range between like the 12-ish area, the low 12s, and the low. This is like the 11.33 area. I do believe NIO is going to stay somewhere here for tomorrow, but I also believe that later on, going to maybe like the week after, the last week of the year, going into 2023, NIO is going to start coming down, unfortunately. Now, we do have NIO Day coming up, so maybe that could help us somewhat. But if the whole market is like beginning to tank, it's very likely NIO is going to go for these gap fills. We have a lot of gaps to the downside, by the way. Does every single gap in history have to be filled? No. But if there are gaps nearby, it's very possible, and the majority of the time, most of them will get filled. And I do believe NIO will come down to fill these gaps eventually. It may take, another week. It may take 3 weeks, but eventually, I do believe that's going to happen. So, anyways, for tomorrow, I'm predicting that NIO will likely stay between the very low 12s, and that's going to be like the highest point, and then the lowest point would be around 11.33. I expect it to be quite volatile, maybe bouncing back and forth. It might try to push above 12 for some time, but I wouldn't be surprised that if the market starts tanking, NIO could end up coming down to 11.66 or even break below it. Now, if the market ends up rebounding and NIO does push up and holds 12, I still will not turn super bullish because I do believe the market's going to take a big hit and eventually NIO will come down next week or even later on. So that's essentially what I have for this video. Please do not call me a shill. I'm simply stating what the charts are telling us, and that is the truth. However, my thesis and still liking this company, my thesis and still potentially investing in it, and I just wanted to I want to say potentially because I'm not giving financial advice. I'm not going to say to do that. The thesis behind it is because this company is still very strong fundamentally. They're showing very nice deliveries, great products, great management, and I am still very, very bullish for the long term. I want to make that very, very clear. I do believe it will break all-time highs, but we have to be patient in the process. Thank you all for listening. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. NIO to the moon, and peace out.